And I just remember in that moment, it kind of hit me between the eyes, as they say. I had this thought, am I really that delicate? I
Mm.
can't imagine that in order for me to become functional and relatively pain free for the rest of my life, I'm going to have to be this hyper aware of every every vertebral body being lined up in a certain way. And I just had this moment where I'm like, I can't imagine that this is true.
Hello and welcome to the Over 50 Health and Wellness Show. I'm your host, Kevin English. I'm the founder of The Silver Edge, and our mission is to help you build and maintain a lean, healthy body that you love for the rest of your life, so you can show up in the second half of your life as the healthiest, strongest, most vital version of yourself. But before we jump into today's episode, I want to ask you to do me a huge favor. Would you take 1 minute and give this show a 5-star review, especially those of you that are listening on Apple Podcasts? This helps us rank higher, which means more people can find us. But the real reason I'm asking is that the guests I invite on this show often check to see how many ratings and reviews we have to help them determine if this podcast is legit or not. Okay, without further ado, let's get on with today's show. My guest today is Patti Woodworth-Norris. Patti has not only dedicated a quarter of a century to understanding the intricate dance between our minds and bodies, but has also walked the challenging path of personal healing. Patti brings to our show today a unique blend of professional expertise and personal experience. From the depths of anxiety, depression, and chronic pain, she discovered transformative healing modalities that changed her life forever. Today, we'll explore the profound effects of the mind-body connection and how repressed emotional issues can manifest physically. And on top of that, we'll hear Patti's own inspiring journey of rediscovery, resilience, and renewal. So whether you're dealing with chronic pain, seeking answers to midlife challenges, or simply curious about the incredible power of the mind-body connection, this episode promises to be both enlightening and empowering. I started our conversation today by asking Patti how she got interested in this subject.
My health journey, I call it my hitting the wall moment, was about maybe a little over 10 years ago, Kevin. And in hindsight, I realized that I was building to this moment for many years. But my brother was in a car accident, and it was sort of the straw that broke the camel's back. And I went from being sort of relatively okay, or I felt like I was, experiencing sort of the typical things that you associate with aging, a little bit of some pain. And, I was tired and my mood wasn't always very good, but, oh, well, I guess this is just part of it. Anyway, my brother was in this car accident, and I went into, I need to fix this mode, which was my thing. I'm a recovered, it's my job to fix everything person.
Okay.
Recovering. And the next day after his accident, I woke up and it felt as if I don't know, I'd fallen into this huge hole. This incredibly strong sense of anxiety overwhelmed me like nothing I'd ever experienced before. And over the next few days, that sunk into this really heavy depressive episode, which I had also never experienced before. And the backstory to all that was that I had been building a chronic pain pattern in my life for probably the better part of 8 to 10 years before this. So that turned on in an even more significant way, and just it didn't turn off. Because up until that point, it was an on again, off again situation. And now it was just on and stuck on. So yeah, I call it the trifecta, Kevin. I had the anxiety, the depression, and the chronic pain. And it was just sort of, I felt like it was just sort of, I slammed into a wall.
Okay, so a few things that are really interesting that jump out there.
Mm-hmm.
You started by saying, hey, my hitting the wall moment. And then immediately you said, well, I did hit a wall, but I had been
Hmm.
building up to this, in fact. And you were building this chronic pain pattern, I think.
Absolutely. That's exactly what
Talk
I
to
was
us a
doing.
little bit. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
that jumped out at me.
Right.
What do you mean when you say I was building a chronic pain
Well,
pattern?
so I didn't understand that at the time, Kevin, but I do now because the last
Mm,
basically decade of my life has been learning to understand how this works. My backstory with the chronic pain was in my early 30s. I had two very young children. I had a job, I had a husband, I had a whole stable full of animals, literally, that I was looking after. I had a lot of balls in the air. And I went into my barn one day and lifted a bag of horse feed, which I had done hundreds of times before in my life. And I felt this popping sensation in my back, and it was pretty intense. So I strained my back. I mean, the other part of my backstory is that I have been a registered massage therapist for the better part of 30 years. So I have an understanding of body mechanics and all that. So I went to a chiropractor. She snapped me, got better, and I didn't really think a whole lot more of it. But what transpired after that was every so often over well, up until fairly recently, actually, it would just go out, as they say,
hmm,
right? And
yep.
sometimes it didn't seem like there was really any catalyst for it. I just reached down to pick up a ball to throw for my dog, and boom, like the reaction, the intensity of that sensation was completely disproportionate to the action. So what I understand now, Kevin, is that in the moment that during a very highly charged, stressful period of my life where I was trying to do a lot of things in a lot of ways for a lot of people, I had that experience of my back going out, and then I became protective of it. Right? I developed the neural pathways between my brain and that part of my body to say, okay, we there's been a problem here, so we need to be aware of that and be protective of it, right? So I was laying this very firm foundation, this neural patterning for experiencing pain in that part of my body. And then whenever any sort of stressful event came along, or the scale just tipped a little bit too far in the direction of me being overwhelmed or fatigued, boom, it would show up again. Yeah, and it just got to a
Hmm.
point where I was always, and I didn't realize that at the time, but I realize now I was always looking for it, right? I was always waiting for it. I was always running interference on it. So, as they say, what you look for, you will find. So, I got very good at producing it. Mm.
Hmm. Oh yeah. Okay. Lots of juicy stuff in there. So you
Yeah.
I think most of our listeners can relate to, hey, I went to pick something up that I've done many
Hmm.
times and pow,
Yeah.
snap, bang, crack,
Right.
whatever, right? And there's that acute pain,
Yes.
and but then when that leads to, like you said, my back would just quote unquote go
Right.
out, and you develop these protective patterns.
Hmm.
I think you'd even said, hey, the pain would be disproportionate to the movement. You
Absolutely.
mentioned picking up a
Yes.
ball, and I've even heard that one of the most common injuries on a golf course is back injuries, and it doesn't occur during where you would assume maybe that really
Right. The
intense
swing.
rotational
Yeah.
movement. It's when golfers are bending
Yes.
over and picking up balls.
Yes. Or
Just a
or
really
pulling up your
strange
socks.
statistic.
That's the other one you hear all the time, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So when you talk about developing these protective patterns, does that just mean, obviously you're very hyper aware? You mentioned I'm kind of looking for it.
Hmm.
So do you stop doing
Yes.
things? I mean, how does this affect your life and day to
Yeah.
day?
For me, and I mean, I think for a lot of people, I've spent a lot of time educating myself on this topic. But for me, what it looked like was over a period of time, my life just kept getting smaller and smaller because prior to that,
Mm,
I'd been intensely physically active. I ran. I had a number of horses that I was showing in equestrian activities actively, with all of the labor that was associated with that, moving hay, cleaning stalls. I had an incredibly physically active lifestyle. And over a period of time, it just kept getting smaller and smaller, right? Because, oh, I can't do that because that might hurt my back. Or, yeah, I just went from being this very intense, moving all the time kind of lifestyle to when I was at my worst, Kevin, walking up a flight of stairs was almost more than I could manage. Like I went from being very vital and active to almost feeling disabled without really any
And
mechanism of obvious severe injury that
right,
precipitated it. Right.
right. And now, where was this in your life? Was this in your 30s, 40s? You mentioned in your 30s you were kind of moving in. And how long did you go from, hey, I tweaked my back that
Mm-hmm.
first time, to I'm now living kind of in this chronic pain state?
It was in my early 30s when I hurt my back. I now understand that
Hmm.
differently, but and it was, I would say I really was at my worst with it. I hit the wall with that pain in my mid 40s. So it was about a 12-year, 13-year process
Mm.
to get from lifting the bag of feed to, oh, I can't barely walk up a flight of stairs. Yeah.
Okay, so 12 to 13
Mm-hmm.
years of just this condition progressing, let's just say,
Yes.
right? Okay, so talk to us then from that point where we're now living in this state of chronic
Mm-hmm.
pain, constant chronic pain, and your life has gotten smaller,
Right.
as you said. How do you get from there to where you are today?
Yeah. Well, so I did all the usual things, Kevin, right? I mean, I went to my doctor. At that time I was also going through some hormonal shifts that happen for women in their early 40s, so that was a
Sure.
variable. I was very, for whatever reason, I have a bit of a stubborn streak and I was very resistant to the idea of using meds in an ongoing way, so I wasn't really kind of willing to go down that road, but I saw the physical therapist. I am a massage therapist. I had massage. I went to the chiropractor. I saw the osteopath. I saw a kinesiologist who was helping me to break down my posture and my movement patterns. And it was actually, there was a watershed moment when I was seeing the kinesiologist, because she was one of the last sort of practitioners that I went to try and problem solve this out. And she did this analysis of my posture and where my pelvis sat and everything that was in relation to what I was experiencing in my back. And she had this moment where she said, this and that and the other thing are this much out of whack and this many degrees. And, it got very, very fussy. And I just remember in that moment, it kind of hit me between the eyes, as they say. I had this thought, am I really that delicate? I
Mm.
can't imagine that in order for me to become functional and relatively pain free for the rest of my life, I'm going to have to be this hyper aware of every every vertebral body being lined up in a certain way. And I just had this moment where I'm like, I can't imagine that this is true. It was such an interesting moment. Shortly thereafter, I stumbled, the universe sometimes gives you what you need. I was looking around on the internet, as we often do, and I came
Right.
across a book called Healing Back Pain, which was written by Dr. John Sarno. And Dr. Sarno, he died a couple of years ago at the age of 94 or something. He had a really long, robust life, but he ran the Rusk Institute at the New York University Medical Centers. He ran the rehab clinic there. So, give you the Coles Notes version of his story because it's a huge part of my story. He had been working there for about 7 or 8 years, if I remember the story correctly, working with a lot of people with chronic pain. And what he noticed was that a lot of these folks would get symptomatic relief using the typical things that people use: physical therapies, cortisone injections, anti inflammatories, that sort of thing. But a lot of them, it wasn't long lasting, meaningful resolution of their symptoms. They'd always come back.
Right.
And I think he just kind of got to a point where he said, I don't want to spend the rest of my professional career feeling like I'm not accomplishing what I'm setting out to do. So the story is that he went back and pulled the thousands of files of the people that he'd worked with during that period of time that didn't get any meaningful resolution to their symptoms. And he was looking for common threads. What are the consistent things about these folks? He was looking for personality characteristics. He was looking for any history of unresolved childhood trauma. He was looking for anything really that would start to paint a picture. And out of that, he developed a diagnosis he called TMS, which stood for Tension Myoneural Syndrome. So I'm reading this book, Kevin, on a plane. We're taking our two teenage sons on vacation for March break. And it was about a 4-hour read. This is not a long, slog, but I was just utterly gobsmacked by what I was reading, because it was as if he had written the book about me. Like, oh my God, this guy wrote this book about me. So the personality characteristics of people that are prone to that sort of mind body, that's really what we're talking about, right? Manifestation is, they tend to be very sensitive. They tend to be people pleasing. They tend to have a strong work ethic. There's often what he coined the term goodist, which essentially means there's somebody that always wants to be a good person, even if it's at their own expense, right? Strong social conscience, a fixer, someone that's always trying to fix everything. They tend to be sometimes workaholics. So he painted this picture of all the sort of personality characteristics that someone tends to present with. And I mean, I'm not going to lie, a lot of those those boxes were ticked for me when I was reading about this. So that, and often also some measure of trauma from childhood that never really got resolved, right? And trauma is such a hot topic right now. There's so many different ways we can understand it. Trauma doesn't have to be just your big T stuff. It can be an accumulation of smaller T traumas that end up having the same cumulative effect on the nervous system as big ones, which I can definitely relate to. I didn't have a horrific childhood, but definitely had some experiences that I don't think ever really got processed or moved through my system. So all of that, his theory was that it basically causes the brain, the nervous system and the brain, to become overwhelmed. And rather than, basically the brain interprets those strong emotional things that are happening that we've repressed and shoved down, a bit like a volcano that's getting ready to explode, as being a greater threat to our existence and to our survival than a pain episode would be. So Sarno's original theory was that it basically acted as a distraction from our emotional state.
You mean the pain acted as a distraction from the emotional state? Interesting.
Right, because if I'm having significant pain in my body, then I'm going to be focused on that, right? I'm not going to be thinking about all of the emotional things that might, or the mental distresses I'm feeling around the circumstances in my life, if I can't walk across the room because I'm in so much pain. It keeps us solely focused on those sensations. This was his theory. So the mechanism of that, at that time, he proposed that what happened was the brain would cause a mild ischemia, which basically just means a decrease in blood flow to the area of the body that was having the pain. Since then, there have obviously been dozens of skilled healthcare practitioners that have taken this ball and continued to run it down the field. And we now understand that maybe that wasn't the exact mechanism of how it worked. But the good news is we don't really need to fully understand the exact mechanism of how it works, because the approach to healing it is essentially the same. But this was Dr. Sarno's theory. So I read through this book, Kevin, and I was just like, okay. So all the evidence based on his theory would point to the fact that this is what I'm experiencing. Mm-hmm. So then he proposed, this is how we get out of it. First of all, you learn that this is actually the process. You're actually okay, but your body is expressing what you haven't been able to emotionally express. The volcano's built up to a point where it's getting ready to blow. So we learn how it works. That's step one. Gain that intellectual conscious understanding of that this is what's actually happening for you. The second thing that he proposed was stop all physical treatments. Which, for me as a massage therapist who've been very conditioned to think that there's always a biomechanical reason to have these pain issues, was a little bit of a mind melt for me to wrap my head around that. But the rationale for that actually makes a lot of sense, because if I'm running off to the osteopath or the chiropractor or the massage therapist and getting adjustments aimed at fixing myself, then the message I'm sending to my subconscious is that I'm broken, that there's actually something wrong. So you have to stop all of that. And then the next step was, learn how it works, stop all physical treatments, get on with living your life. Yeah.
Okay.
Listen, his approach was very much like baptism by fire. Right? Like, yeah,
Yeah.
it was not a gentle approach in that sense, but once again, what message are you sending to your subconscious when you go out and you start living your life again? Well, that I'm actually okay. And then the fourth thing that he talked about was there will be some, his belief was that there's going to be a small segment of the population that is going to need to do some emotional discovery to help let that volcano let off a bit of steam a little bit at a time and bring the nervous system into a better state. Because pain is a function of your sympathetic nervous system, the fight flight part of your nervous system. So if you are constantly in a fight flight nervous system state, then you are ripe to have pain, right? You can't really have one without the other. So that, I think that was the rationale for some people, a little bit of expressive writing done in a very particular way, or some unpacking with a therapist or a coach or someone of that nature would be the other part of the process. And in my experience, that is a necessary part of the process for most people. I think, I don't know that part of it, not saying that he wasn't right, but I think that most people would benefit from some little bit of emotional discovery, because there's a lot of us walking around that don't really know. We
Yeah.
don't know what we've got beating around inside of us, and we don't understand the impact it's having on us. So,
Yeah. Our baseline is our baseline, right? And until we've experienced something different, we don't know. So that's well
yeah,
said.
yeah.
So, Patty, it sounds like then what you're saying is this chronic pain
Mm.
really, it's emotional pain being manifest in your body. Is that right? Is
Yeah,
that
that would be a
a
beautiful way
fair
to,
way of looking
yes,
at?
yeah, it's your body expressing physically what you're not able to
Yeah.
express emotionally. That is the theory. Yes. And yeah,
Gotcha.
and for me, Kevin, this ended up being 100% true.
Okay.
So the next part of my process was I did a lot of reading, a lot of understanding, because I think my
Hmm.
brain was so indoctrinated to think physically after several decades of being a massage
Yeah.
therapist, thinking very biomechanically. It took me a little while to kind of convince it, like, no, actually it's okay, we're okay here. That was So there was a lot of reading and educating myself, and then which was helping to reprogram my subconscious, right? Oh, I actually am okay. Even though I'm uncomfortable,
Hmm.
I'm still okay. And then I did a fair amount of expressive writing in a pretty particular way, which helped me to excavate some things that, being a good girl, I typically wouldn't acknowledge or express in a way that was safe, and I wasn't dumping it on any of the people that I cared about.
Hmm.
And then the next step for me was learning about neuroplasticity, which was probably one of the more exciting aspects of my experience. And that really helped to kind of take me across the finish line, would be the way I would describe it. Yeah.
Okay, so let's put a pin in
Yeah.
neuroplasticity for
For
just
a
a
second.
second, because
Yeah.
I definitely want to dig
Yeah.
into
Yeah.
that. I'm still fascinated by this idea that we have these three very simple steps. Let's
Mm-hmm.
get
Mm-hmm.
educated, let's stop all physical treatments, and let's get on living our
Right.
lives. And you had mentioned that you were, and of course, we're going to say that the cause of this pain then is coming. It's neural, not
Yep.
physical. And you had mentioned that you were living small before this. You had stopped doing a lot of the things that you were living protectively, right? And I can see how there's this juxtaposition then
Mm-hmm.
between this very careful
Mm-hmm.
way that, of course, and what are you're wiring these new neural pathways, I
Absolutely.
suppose, if that's the
It
correct
is.
way to
It's
say that,
absolutely the
right?
right way to say
You're
it.
you're laying down these new neural networks, I
Yes.
suppose, that are this very protective, fearful way of living.
Mm-hmm.
And here comes somebody that says, hey, well, just stop doing that.
Mm-hmm. Right. What does that look
And
like? Right.
what does that look like?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So let's pull this
Yeah.
apart a little
Yeah.
bit. You'd mentioned neuroplasticity. What the heck is that? Is it what it sounds like? And how specifically do we then apply
Mm-hmm.
this outside of just go live your life like you
Right.
normally
No, I
would? Right.
absolutely. And Dr. Sarno was a master of making things simple.
Mm,
I don't think for most people it's as simple as that. I think there's a certain amount of soothing that we need to learn to do as we start to take steps forward into a fuller version of our lives, which was definitely the case for me. And there are accounts of people that kind of took that advice to heart and just said, I'm going to go out and start doing all the things, even if I'm in pain. And I'm just going to basically teach my body and my brain that I'm okay the hard way. And I don't think that's the right or the better way for most people to do it. I think doing it more in a conditioned, graded way is more sensible. But the stories of people who have done it that way are incredibly compelling, right? And a lot of these folks were people that they were suicidal, Kevin, right? Like they had been through so much pain for so long, and no one was able to give them an answer. They felt they had nothing to lose. So that wasn't where I was, although my mental state was not good at one point in time there. But the neuroplasticity part of this, and this is where it's so powerful, because I went from having neural pathways around I'm strong and I'm capable and I'm fit and I'm active and I'm vital, to now I had neural pathways around I'm not capable, I'm not strong, I'm broken, there's something wrong with me. So in order to move back in, swing the pendulum back in the other direction, I had to unlearn some of this stuff that I had learned. And we're capable, what neuroplasticity actually means is that our brains are plastic, that they're capable of learning and adapting and changing well past what we have been conditioned to believe around that, which is good news. Like, it's such good news. Yeah. So I was able to use these techniques and my understanding of neuroplasticity to rewire some of those neural pathways that told me that I wasn't strong and I wasn't capable, and that this was what my life was going to look like, right? I was able to use these processes to help rewire that on a neurological level, which when you rewire it neurologically, like your beliefs start to change, your cyclical thought patterns start to change, which all has a hugely impactful effect on your actual state, on your emotional state, right? And your nervous system state. You come out of that fight or flight place, or freeze in my case, because I was kind of diving in and out of all of those at times, into a better emotional state, right? You have more energy, you feel more optimistic. You're starting to spend a little more time thinking about, well, rather than how are all the ways that this day is going to suck, how could this day be great? Like, there's this profound shift that happens in both your beliefs and the way that you think from a moment to moment basis. And every thought that we think creates a corresponding chemical reaction in the body. So if we're thinking stressful thoughts, then we are producing stress chemicals that line up with those thoughts. So it's like you get on this merry-go-round that's just going faster and faster. And if you can't find some way to interrupt that and turn it the other way, it's hard to get off.
Sure. That's a vicious cycle,
it
right?
is.
That chronic stress or chronic pain. And we know that chronic stress is just horrible for our physical health as well as our emotional health. And that's a downward spiral. Now, you're talking about rewiring your brain and the plasticity here, and learning new behaviors, new ways of thinking and viewing the world. You had mentioned journaling. Aside from that, what are some practical things that one might do? Because it's so simple in concept. I imagine it might not be so simple in application.
No, it's definitely something that I was able to start that process myself, Kevin, educating myself, learning how it worked, starting to express some of these difficult emotions through that journaling. Ultimately, I had to get, and I think for most people, if they want to take this on sort of as a project, take themselves on it as a project, it's super helpful to have someone who knows how to use those modalities to help you, which I did, right? I invested in training. I did sessions with practitioners to help me rewire some of the bigger stuff. But I think the first step, Kevin, is we just have to first, like I said, understand how this works. That if you are experiencing chronic pain, you always want to rule out any of your sort of life-threatening things, right? Like, we don't want to just assume. If I'm having severe chest pain, I don't want to assume this is just a mind-body thing. I'm going to go to the ER and get checked out. What most of the doctors that do this work will say is, rule out cancer, rule out the big stuff. And then if you've ruled that out, then you're pretty safe. And, really, what have you got to lose? But to assume that there's some measure of this being a mind body manifestation and approach it from that angle. Because you're only going to improve your situation by cleaning up your emotional state and understanding how your mind and your body work together. So there's all of that. But then I think on a practical level, what we're really talking about here is the first step is awareness, right? Like after you understand how this works, becoming more aware on a daily basis, on an hourly basis. What I'll often suggest to my clients at the beginning of working together is, why don't you set an alarm on your phone or on whatever it is you use to maybe every couple of hours, just drop in and ask yourself, what nervous system state am I in right now? Like, are my shoulders up around my ears? Am I clenching my jaw? Is my stomach all in knots? And if you find yourself in that sort of dysregulated, sympathetic, stress nervous system state, then there's simple things that you can do to help bring you back into a better state. Now, that's something we can all do. Once an hour, once every couple of hours. What state am I in right now? And even myself, Kevin, with the level of awareness that I have around this, occasionally, I'll be going out to the car to get my briefcase. I'm going to work, and I'll notice that my shoulders are up around my ears. Yeah. I'm like, Patti, what the? Why? Right. Right? It's just a pattern. Yeah. It's that I need to get going. I'm going to be late, and then our body takes on that physical presentation.
It does,
and that just creates pain. So the basic simple thing we can do is just become more aware. What state am I in right now? Right. And then,
I absolutely love that.
Yeah. That's how we can't change what we're not aware of. So that's the first step. And then after you become aware, and it can be very interesting because you don't realize how much of your day you're actually either, you're bracing, or you're feeling anxious, or you're rushing, or, there's just a lot of pressure in the state that you're in. So that once you realize it, you can go, okay, I think maybe it's time for me to take some action around bringing myself into a better sort of default nervous system state. And that's where it gets really interesting, because there's so many cool ways that we can do that we can learn to do that, that's kind of what I do with my clients. It's what I teach in the coaching program that I'm a part of. And the really cool thing, Kevin, is it's not a one size fits all approach, right?
Right.
Not everyone is going to respond, like everything in life, to every technique the same way. So we've spent a lot of time, myself and my two partners, the last decade, trying to get ourselves well. And we kind of said, let's take all the stuff that we've learned and save people all of that time and energy trying to unpack and figure this out and put it all in one place, which is really what we've done. But yeah, learn how it works and then start becoming more aware.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I'm a pretty high-strung person myself. I can 100% relate to what you're saying. I do have check-ins with myself continuously, and I quite often find myself I'm just right, that cortisol junkie. Yes. But I think our it's exacerbated by our culture and our society. Absolutely. Our modern culture really idolizes that go get 'em, that busy culture, and that's a lot of that. It's just not serving us well, right? It's putting us in that.
It's not sustainable, Kevin, right? It's not sustainable. Like if you're living off of stress hormones, which is what a startlingly high percentage of the folks in the Western world are doing. Mm-hmm. They're living off of adrenaline and cortisol. Guilty as charged. Like I'm not so much like that anymore. But I realized, actually, it's pretty interesting. About a year ago, I was in a coaching session with a client and I was teaching some of this. And I just had this awareness pop in, like, holy crap, Patti, you lived your whole life off of adrenaline. As I was teaching this other person, I had this another level of awareness come in, like, hello, sister, like, take your own advice. Mm-hmm. It's so common. It's so common, and it's not sustainable. And for most of us, if we don't kind of learn how it works and learn to work with it, ultimately it will show up in the form of some sort of health crisis. because it's just not sustainable,
Yeah. Right.
right?
Right. I'm 100% with you.
It's
Yeah.
an uncomfortable
No, that's right.
truth.
It's an uncomfortable
Yeah,
truth.
yeah.
Yeah. And it's one that affects, like you said, I think most of us to some degree or another.
Yes.
You don't meet many Zen masters in Western culture these
No.
days, people who are living in this very joyful, relaxed state. And it seems to me that what you're doing when it comes to chronic pain or chronic
Hmm.
stress, and I can
Well, you
see
know what?
now
They're kind of
they're very
they are.
interrelated.
They
They
very
most
much
certainly
are.
are.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. This conversation certainly pulling that out. But you had mentioned, I think earlier you had talked about you had sought all these different
Hmm.
modalities to manage the pain,
Hmm.
right? Okay,
Yeah.
so I get a cortisol shot, I get an adjustment, but that's not really resolving or treating in any long-term
No.
way. So it's this step back and this much more, I guess, complex and nuanced look at what's going on,
Hmm.
this whole body as a whole
Hmm.
system. And I love how you approach that. But it brings me to my next
Yeah.
question. What is the role, or is there a role in this for, let's say, exercise,
Oh,
strength
yeah.
training,
Yeah.
or where does that fit in, or
Yeah,
does
it
it?
absolutely does. I mean, as you know, with what you do for a living, right, where your expertise is, exercise is a critically important part of being healthy generally. So, and Dr. Sarno was all about, as soon as you figure this out, get out there and start hitting the gym, go for a run, like move your body.
Okay, yeah,
And I am totally of that mind. And we're 100% supportive of that in our coaching program as well. I think the fair question maybe to ask around that, and one I've had to ask myself is, what is the intention behind the exercise that I'm engaging in? I'll give you an example.
yeah,
So probably about 6 months ago, I have, as I mentioned earlier, I have a whole bunch of animals at my house. I'm a huge animal lover. I have 3 dogs, young dog that we just rescued, very high energy, not going for a walk every day, not an option. So
yeah,
I'm out walking we live in the country, lots of beautiful places to walk. And I'm walking down the road and I'm just giving her, right? I'm clipping right along. Oh, my heart rate, getting my steps in, all of this. Validity to all of that. However, it's a beautiful night. And I kind of had this moment where I thought, Patty, would it be okay for you to be out and moving your body and enjoying moving your body, appreciating the fact that you can move your body after years of feeling like you couldn't, and at the same time, taking the time to stop and notice your environment and be present, right? Notice the sun, the color in the sky as the sun's going down. Let the dog stop and sniff the ground instead of, no, no, let's keep going. Let's keep going. We got to keep moving. Like, I think you see what I'm getting at? Like our intention
I
behind
do.
what we're doing in regards to everything, including exercise, I think can be really impactful. Am I doing this just like when you think about the whole weight loss community?
Yep.
There's so much drive around. I got to do this to burn calories, and I got to do this to get my heart rate in this zone. And I got to, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with any of that, but that is all being driven by this inherent belief that I'm not okay the way I am. I'm
Yeah.
not good enough the way I am, so I need to do all of this in some way to improve myself, but also maybe subconsciously to punish myself for the fact that I'm not good enough the way I am. So, once again, the awareness. Why am I doing what I'm doing? Can it be about more than just pounding the pavement and lifting the weight? Right?
Right.
Do it. I guess what
Right.
we're talking about, Kevin, is doing it a little bit more mindfully.
A little more mindfully, or yeah, I would be a proponent of a lot more mindfully
Yeah,
because
yeah.
you're 100% right. We work the vast majority of our clients come to us for
Right,
weight loss.
right.
And you're 100% right. Well, we start to uncover that, and providing the person's willing to be vulnerable
Yes,
with us, it's usually from a place of
right,
insecurity, so very often from a place of self-loathing,
right.
self-disgust, and it's these expectations, and they're making that change from that place. They're uncomfortable where they are for whatever
Yes,
reason. And while that's often a very powerful motivator to
absolutely.
start a fitness journey, that's not going to sustain
No,
you for the rest of your life. What you're talking about is making change from a place of self-love and awareness, from treating your body as a sacred vessel where you want
right.
take the best care of it that you possibly can,
Right.
right? As opposed to, yeah, this is, I need to get these steps in for punishment for the ice cream I had
Right.
after dinner or something
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
that, which
It's not
is
sustainable,
exercise is
Kevin. It's not
punishment. It's not
sustainable.
sustainable.
And
Right.
so many, and
Right.
I see this with my clients in so many patterns of their lives, including weight loss. If it's being driven by, I'm not good enough the way I am, and you don't do any work to kind of emotional work to kind of clean that up and rewire that belief system, then I can pretty much guarantee you that as soon as you take your foot off the gas pedal, you're going to end up right back where and I'm sure you've seen that too, or
100%.
worse.
I think everybody's seen it. Let's just look at diet culture,
Exactly.
right? When we go on a diet, we're by definition doing something kind of that we don't
Right.
like. It's not fun. We do it for a while and we do it, we use grit and determination, willpower or motivation, whatever it is, to get us through this 1, 2, 3,
Right.
6 months, whatever
Right.
it is. And then we're like, oh, thank God that horrible ordeal is over. And it's not hard to figure out what happens
Right.
next,
Right.
right?
Right. It's so common.
We're going to It's so common. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, Patti, I wanted to, as we're kind of wrapping
Yeah.
up here, I think I read on your website about the role of happiness or joy in this journey. We've touched on this a little bit, but what is the role in increasing our happiness, specifically when it comes to managing stress? And I think now we can see that would have a role in managing chronic pain as well.
Well, like when we are, like we've already talked about, Kevin, when we are focusing on things, which is going to necessarily mean we're thinking about things in a certain way and therefore producing chemicals that line up with those thoughts. If we are focusing on things that feel good to us, that bring more joy and more optimism and more, maybe even more excitement into our lives, then we are flooding our body with the chemicals that line up with that, right? Very,
Yeah.
Not pro-inflammatory chemicals, anti-inflammatory chemicals. So we're doing beautiful things to our health by doing that. And, I think on a greater level, like if we only have, and if most of your audience is the over 50 crowd, we know at this point, Kevin, that the road in front of us is likely shorter than the one behind us.
Yeah.
So that being the case, even if I can't control 99.9% of the things that are happening outside of me, which let's be honest, that's the case, how can I make the most out of the time that I have? What do I need to focus on? Which ultimately goes back to stepping off of the stress train, right? Getting off that merry-go-round more and more consciously and deliberately choosing what we want to focus on. That's been, I think, with what's happened here around the world here in the last 3 or 4 years with the pandemic, it's been such an exercise in this, right? Because there's so many things, obviously, that are way beyond our control. And if we focus on those things and argue with them and try to fight against them, it doesn't change it. But what it does do is make us feel bad.
Right.
So and
there's a physiological consequence
it does.
of that as
it
well.
It does. So
yeah.
Even recognizing that, one of my favorite spiritual teachers is a fellow by the name of Michael Singer. I'm not sure if you've heard of him, but he talks about this idea that, we drop into these bodies for most of us for 80 plus or minus years. And we have this time between our birth and our death, and we have to fill it with something. Right. And in the bigger scheme of things, that's not even a tiny grain of sand on a huge beach. So can we really, like what we're talking about here is get out of our stress response, out of our chronic stress response into a calmer state where we can choose what we're putting our focus on and create our lives, build our lives out of that conscious choice rather than staying in that default nervous system state and just running on adrenaline and cortisol all day, every day, with all of the, obvious physical, mood, health impacts that's going to create over the long term. So, yeah, I think actively seeking more joy, actively choosing to be a little bit more childlike, right? Which I know for a lot of us, life is serious, right? Yeah. What if we could just kind of choose, today I'm going to look for ways to be a little bit more childlike and use my imagination to imagine what I would love to have more of in my life as opposed to using it to worrying about everything. Because that is the way most of us use our imaginations. Right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's
Yeah.
awareness
No, I
and
love that.
refocusing.
Yeah, that's what I really wanted to pull out. I think we know that there are obviously detriments to our mental health, our emotional health, our physical health with this chronic stress state, but there are physiological benefits to the opposite of
Oh,
that for seeking
absolutely.
joy, seeking out happiness. And I love that. I love the way you say it. Let's look for opportunities to be more
Right.
childlike. And those of us over 50, that's part of why we're aging.
Right.
It's not so much a biological
Right.
process. It's because we lose this usefulness, this
Yes.
childlike wonder and joy of this beautiful life all around us.
Hmm.
Absolutely love that. And there's health benefits to that as well.
So many
So
reasons to do it,
so many
and
reasons.
really
Yeah.
no reasons not to do it.
Well, yeah, there's no reasons not to do it, but it's difficult, I think, because just the times we live in, our
Absolutely.
culture, our society, we have all this crazy political division right now here in the US.
Hmm.
Like you said, we've all gone through this very upsetting COVID
Yep.
environment, and there's a 24/7 news cycle, and there's all the comparison problems with all
Absolutely.
the social
Yes.
media. And there's all these, it's so easy to get sucked into this negativity, this stress, this fight or flight, constant chronic
Hmm.
stressed state,
Agreed.
that it takes work, doesn't it? It takes conscious
Conscious,
effort, I
deliberate,
think, to get away from that.
conscious,
Yeah.
deliberate choices and decisions to
Mm-hmm.
disengage from things that are no longer serving you. Really is what we're talking about. I mean,
Yeah.
our home is a no news zone. It has been for the better part of 20 years because I recognized early on doesn't
Good
do
for
anything good
you.
for
That
me.
you're a pioneer there. If you were that long ago,
Well, yeah,
yeah.
I mean, I started to realize the impact it was having on me pretty early on. So, and
Right.
we've held fast to that. And I think it's been a really positive choice for us. But yeah, the social media, walking around with a computer in our pockets and on
Mm-hmm.
basically available 24/7, our brains were not designed to be able to deal with the
Right.
level of sensory stimulation that we have on a daily
Right.
basis. The our brains have not evolved at the same rate that the technology has. So if
Right.
we want to be well, we have to be willing to really kind of question some of our habits around that and make some different choices. And that's where, once again, neuroplasticity work can be super helpful because it can help you break those habits and those patterns more easily than sort of white knuckling it. Yeah.
Right. White knuckling is going to be a
It
tough way to
is.
go
Yeah,
there.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
it is. I've tried that in multiple areas of my life.
It's
It
not much
hasn't
fun.
always ended so well for me. No, no, it doesn't usually end well
No,
either. All
no.
right. All
Yeah.
right. Well, Patti, let me ask you this. What's next for you? What's on the horizon? What are you excited about in the next year or so?
Oh, I'm excited about a lot of things, Kevin. I'm excited, like I mentioned to you earlier, I'm part of a group coaching program that myself and two of my brain training colleagues have been working on for 2 years. So we launched that at the end of last year, and we're just now kind of getting into the marketing of it and really excited about what's happening within that. So I'm excited to continue to work on that. And I also, I have a one on one coaching practice that I'm excited to keep building. And I have so much fun working with my clients, and we get such great results that I look forward to more of that, and learning more that I can bring to all of that to help people even more. Yeah, so there's lots of hoping for more travel, more fun, more adventures, and seeing
Yeah.
some new places that I've wanted to see for a long time that obviously the last 3 or 4 years made it pretty much impossible. So yeah, looking forward to all of that. More adventure,
More
more
adventure.
fun.
Yeah. You don't done living small,
Right.
right?
Yeah, did that for a while.
Yeah.
And yeah, like I said, I want to make the best use of the time that I have between now and whenever that happens. I want to maximize
Right
it.
on. Absolutely love it. All right. Well, Patti, how can people connect with you? How can they learn more if they're interested in working with
Sure.
you? Where do you want to send?
Well, so my personal website is just pattynorris.com. Pretty simple. So that tells you a little bit about who I am and my coaching practice and gives you a bit better understanding of what that would look like. And then the group coaching program that I'm excited to be a part of is you can find that at getwiredforwellness.com. Yeah.
Got it. All right. And folks, I will drop all of that into the show notes along with Patti's social media information. She also mentioned a couple books during our conversation today. I'll make sure I put links to
Mm-hmm.
those in the show notes as
Yep.
well. So, Patti, I just want to thank you so much for coming on the show today, sharing your message, your knowledge, your wisdom, and your love with us. I love the work you're doing. Encourage you to keep it up and just, keep making the world a better place.
Thank you so much for having me, Kevin. I really enjoyed it.
Okay, that's our show for today, folks. If you've enjoyed this podcast, I want to let you know that we have other free resources over at silveredgefree.com. There, you'll find our free guides with our top tips on nutrition, exercise, and healthy lifestyle to assist you in your weight loss and fitness journey. So feel free to head over there and download anything that looks useful to you. I'll put links to everything we talked about in the show notes, and you guys can find those over at silveredgefitness.com/226. As we wrap up our time together today, you can show your support for this show in two important ways. The first is to tell a friend about this podcast and encourage them to give it a listen. The second is for you YouTube folks to click the like and subscribe buttons, and for you podcast folks to consider giving this podcast a 5-star review on whatever platform you listen to podcasts on, and be sure to subscribe and follow so you don't miss any future episodes. I really appreciate you spending your time with me today, and until next time, stay strong.